Time now for some business news on the programme, and for that I'm joined by Catherine Bennett from our business desk. Hello, Catherine.
Hi.
You're going to be starting us off then with some cinema news, because the 25th James Bond film has been pushed back for a third time. This is until April next year. Bad news for Bond lovers, but plenty more bad news for the cinema industry overall. The Cineworld chain is in trouble.
Particularly, yes. So the company confirmed today that it would close all of its cinemas in the UK and the US from Thursday this week. And that's simply because it doesn't have the films to bring in those audiences. And it's the world's second largest cinema group. And so this decision is going to affect around 45,000 jobs. That's 128 cinemas in the UK and 536 cinemas in the US. Shares in the chain plunged almost 50% in early trading, and that's pared back since to a drop of about 30%. Cineworld's CEO has said that the company has no other choice. They're hoping to get financial aid from the government and to reopen in about 2 months' time.
Yeah, and meanwhile, Madrid has become Europe's biggest coronavirus hotspot. Authorities there putting the city and its suburbs under a new partial lockdown. Catherine, tell us a bit about what that means for businesses in Madrid.
Well, restaurants have to close at 11 p.m, shops and bars have to close at 10 p.m. And although these restrictions are, of course, far less strict than the lockdown put in place in March and April, it has proved controversial, particularly with local authorities, and as local businesses are reaching breaking point. Georgina Robertson has more on this.
These latest measures will have a massive economic impact and lead to the loss of more than 15,000 jobs in hotels, bars and restaurants, according to Madrid's Hospitality Association. Many who work in bars and restaurants are worried.
Creo que con estas medidas muchos locales pensarán en cerrar, porque imagínese, si las cuentas ya no cubrían como estábamos, ahora al 60% afuera y 50% dentro, y encima cerrar a las 11, para nosotros es, ya le digo, o sea, que más pérdida que cubrir gastos.
In June, the IMF forecast the overall gross domestic product would fall 12.8% this year, but predicted an uptick of 6.3% in the GDP in 2021. These restrictions risk changing that. Spain's economy is vulnerable to the pandemic because of its reliance on tourism and its concentration of small businesses. Madrid's justice chief has warned that closures will cost the economy €8 billion over the course of the next month. Some residents fear for their region's economy.
Que hay que ser prudentes y hay que tener todos responsabilidad, pero todo lo que sea no relacionarnos, cerrar todo, no consumir, en definitiva, cargarnos la economía de un país y de una forma tan injusta como lo ha hecho el gobierno de España.
In Spain, the dilemma over how to restrict movement and shut down the virus without killing the economy is highly controversial. On Friday, regional leaders filed an appeal at the National Court to challenge the legality of these restrictions. The ruling is expected this week.
Now let's have a look at some of the European markets to see how they are starting the week. Well, after more positive news around President Trump's COVID-19 diagnosis, including that he might be discharged from hospital later today, we're seeing European indices moving higher. All major European markets up by around 0.2%.
Well, meanwhile, McDonald's, Asda and Sainsbury's are just a few of 22 British companies who've written a letter to the government urging more action on deforestation. Catherine, tell us a bit about it.
That's right. So they're part of a coalition of supermarkets, food firms and restaurants who are telling the UK government to toughen up rules to tackle deforestation. Britain is in the process of drawing up a new law that would penalise companies who use produce from illegally deforested land. McDonald's, Tesco, Unilever, Lidl, Nestle, these are just some of the brands who have signed a letter urging the government to crack down on dodgy supply chains. At the moment, the legislation would only apply to big companies, but they want the rules to affect smaller firms as well, so that those smaller businesses don't have an unfair competitive advantage.
Now, here in France this weekend, demonstrations by climate activists were targeting airports in the country. Catherine, why is that?
Well, they say that the reduction in air traffic due to COVID is actually a good thing, even if it is, of course, costing jobs within the industry. Georgina Robertson looks at the state of the French aviation industry and if the calls for a green industry post-COVID are being heard.
Demonstrators adding pressure to an industry already hard hit by the current global pandemic. Aviation industry revenues are expected to fall by over €350 billion this year. But these protesters are calling for a shift in the industry and a greener approach to air travel.
Ce qu'on veut, c'est justement une réduction du trafic aérien, parce que justement, on a vu avec le Covid-19 que donc il y avait eu une réduction et il ne faut pas de retour à la normale, sinon on va vers un crash climatique.
According to Greenpeace figures, this year European governments have agreed nearly 30 billion euros worth of bailouts for the industry, with more under discussion. The French government has agreed a 7 billion euro bailout for Air France. And with public funds being used to save companies, there are growing voices saying that environmental concerns should be addressed.
Le gouvernement met 7 milliards sans contrepartie, il ferait bien d'accompagner une transition. Donc finalement, il faut dire oui à l'avion utile, mais non à l'avion facile. On le sait, l'aviation, c'est aujourd'hui 3% de nos émissions de gaz à effet de serre.
The French government has been exploring an eco-tax, a charge added to the price of airline tickets, though the head of Air France has publicly balked at the idea. The stakes are high. The International Air Transport Association estimates that currently 500,000 jobs are at risk due to the impact of the coronavirus, including many in tourism.
And finally, for business, the magic theories of market capitalism have failed. That is, according to the Pope, Catherine.
Yes, which is rather an unlikely source, perhaps. So Pope Francis has used his latest encyclical, that's a kind of letter addressed to the whole of the Catholic Church, to come out against capitalism. In the 45,000-word document, he criticises the limitless consumerism of the world today and says that the pandemic has made it clear that politicians need to create more social policies. Let's have a look at an extract.
The fragility of world systems in the face of the pandemic has demonstrated that not everything can be resolved by market freedom. It is imperative to have a proactive economic policy directed at promoting an economy that favors productive diversity and business creativity and make it possible for jobs to be created and not cut.
I didn't think that the Pope would be the person giving us this socialist lecture in 2020, but here we are.
There we are indeed. Thank you very much. Catherine Bennett with the business on the programme. And thanks to you for watching France 24. It is time for a short break, but do stay with us. I'll have all the headlines for you very shortly.